Friday, September 21st, 2024. A nice hotel popped up in Dexter. Costello checked in asking for extra pillows and blankets. He wanted a great night's sleep. What he didn't realize was his brain was still firing on all cylinders, no matter how tired. Laying in bed staring at the walls brought back memories he wished hadn't. Without hesitation, he rifled through the minibar and found 2 small bottles of shit tequila. The desire to drink had been weighing heavily on him for a few days. He figured he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone by scratching that itch and hopefully shutting off his rambling mind. Turned out it took all 3.4 ounces of tequila and 2 cans of beer to shut off the chatterbox in his head. It also triggered some lucid dreams because he spent between midnight and 3 a.m. in and out of slumber trying to figure out if he was dreaming or hallucinating. He finally jumped out of the bed when he saw the faces of the voices who had recited all the toasts back to him when he was suffering from schizophrenic breaks. It was a geometric mosaic of various ages of himself. The disturbing part was he had no teeth or fingertips. Each finger was cut down to the first knuckle, and his mouth was an abyss echoing words. This rendering of himself held up his hands to emphasize the importance of the missing fingertips. The voice very calmly explained to Costello the only way to hide the evidence underneath his fingernails and in between his teeth was to remove it all. Costello's dream state could only open its mouth and hope to communicate because his lips and tongue were numb. His voice flowed out and he asked what it was he was hiding. The rendition of Costello simply responded by telling him he was erasing himself little by little to hide the shame in hopes it would hide any evidence. Costello's dream self began to cry and he heard himself project another toast. Here's to the full-blown libido. Standing in the rain with your closest friend and keeping a promise that you never even made. Costello fell out of bed holding his mouth and searching for his teeth. He looked at all his fingers in relief and saw each fingertip right there where they belonged. Each word from this dream was like it just happened and he was shot through a wormhole right back to this 3-star hotel in Dexter, Missouri. Keeping a promise that you never even made. He wasn't in the mood for riddles. He'd been asleep just long enough to be dehydrated from the booze. There better be sufficient water on board or else he's going to find himself suffering with cramps before he gets to the rivers. The minibar oddly had no bottled water, and he wasn't about to drink tap water here, so he suited up and went down to the lobby in search of a vending machine. Turned out this hotel wasn't equipped with vending machines, so he wandered over to the concierge for help. The concierge was an early to mid-20s woman who rounded up a couple bottles of water for Costello, but not before making sure he knew she was fully into him and apparently cool with bringing the bottles up to his room. Costello had been on the bike for some time now, and he surprisingly found himself fighting off the urge to say no to this young woman. There were plenty of reasons to resist, but he oddly found himself struggling with them. Just as he found the right response to politely decline her request, she pointed out her shift was ending and she would be calling the bellhop over to escort her to her car, per usual. Then she pointed out it was raining and how he would be upset having to walk her out in the rain, even though he was one of her closest friends. He did make a promise to always walk me to my car, but I guess he didn't realize that promise meant he may have to do it in the rain. Sometimes we have to keep promises we never even make, she said. Costello held in a full body shiver. He told her he would do the bellhop a favor by walking her out to her car. She tilted her head and expressed a sentiment about how could she be sure that was the safest choice for her. How did she know he wasn't a murderer? He laughed and validated her. She followed up with a giggle herself and accepted his offer. When they got to her car, she asked Costello for a hug. He leaned in and they embraced in a hug that felt like 2 people who were the closest of friends. The rain continued to pour down on them. Costello thanked her for allowing him to walk her out. She told him he was a kind soul and felt as though letting him just head back to his room wouldn't have given her the chance to spend more time with somebody she may read about someday. Every opportunity to share time with good people is a good chance to cement yourself into the fabric of the universe. She blew him a kiss and said, "I don't know who you are or why you chose to travel through my city, but whoever you are, I wish you nothing but peace and harmonious closure." Costello was literally speechless. He blew her a kiss back and closed his eyes as he bowed his head to her. She became a Ganesha to his obstacles. Every breath and word that exited her gave Costello the hope he needed to push through all of his adversity. They parted ways and Costello went back into the hotel. He looked around for the bellhop to tell him he'd walked out the concierge. After about 15 minutes, he gave up and went to the front desk. That's where he learned the hotel bell closed at 11 p.m. and there was no bellhop on night shift. He didn't utter another word. He just walked back to his room and drank the water. Just before sending himself back to sleep, he took a look at his FaceTime log and text threads. He hadn't spoken with Avery in several days. The dissolve was beginning to feel compelling and he wanted no part of it. His thumb toggled over to the alarm on his phone, and then he set a reminder to call Avery first thing in the morning. He knew if she was aware of everything he was experiencing tonight, she wouldn't be so thrilled to hear from him. However, unless she's figured out a way to spy on him, that certainly won't be the case. Costello slid the side table drawer open and reached for the Bible. He slid his hand around every inch and came up empty. The shock made him shudder to think, would this hotel be without Bibles? How in the fuck could that be possible? He's in Middle America where the Bible goes with every outfit on Sunday and sometimes on Wednesday. The phone gave him a good glare as he considered calling the front desk, but then he realized he was going to start looking like a New Mexico tweaker on Heisenberg's blue meth. He flipped to the Bible app on his phone and searched the word destiny. There were a few results, but this one stood out. Such is the destiny of all who forget God, so perishes the hope of the godless. Job 8:13. Costello didn't like the insistence in failure for the godless. Of course, he still found himself godless and didn't appreciate the negativity, but it always motivated him. He loved how the Bible oddly motivated him when it looked as though it was intending on shaming him. Nobody would take away his hope, and no one certainly took the hope away from the concierge. What the hell was her name? He got a good laugh realizing he failed to ask her name. No worries. He could ask in the morning over self-prepared waffles and yogurt under lock and key. He crashed to the minibar and found a small bottle of mezcal. Wasn't exactly what he was hoping for, but it would do just fine. When he woke in the morning, he opted for a diner and made reservations. That's when it hit him. Who were all these people? Turned out the shorter stops were making him more seen, and he was developing that icon status he wondered whatever happened. It was happening. He panned the crew and looked for any wingnuts in the crowd. They all appeared to be sharp, serious, and more importantly, ready to follow the lead of Costello. He found a milk crate near a dumpster and stepped up to make a statement. He ensured they each understood he wasn't here seeking validation or loyalty. He respected each of them for their dedication and understood if any of them would need to peel off and get back to their day-to-day, it would be fine. He was picking up strong Robert Paulson vibes. He reminded them the group would only succeed if they all see each goal as an effort from the collective consciousness. Breakfast cost Costello way more than he planned, but everything comes with a price. Each of them took a defensive posture and gave the universal symbol of wanting to move to the next checkpoint. Off to the border of Missouri and Illinois, so they could soak in the beauty of the two rivers and tackle the terrain waiting for them in the Appalachians. One more short trip, but a very important one. Saturday was his last day in Missouri and headed for a small piece of southern Illinois. Then a little west of western West Virginia. Another short pedaling day so he could do what any red-blooded American would do. Go see what the Ohio River and Mississippi River had to offer. Everyone was together, and each were sober without a hangover. It was a collective of sorts, wherein They were all very passionate about the mornings. Oddly enough, no one was even talking about their next big challenge, cycling the Appalachian Mountains. Costello doubled his dosage and prepared himself for a highly cerebral experience. Egressing Missouri took one less day than expected, so he had an extra half-gram to gobble down, and sure as hell wasn't going to let that go to waste. The big question was posed. Who the fuck were all these people? Costello pulled into Cairo, Illinois, and sensed the full gram was a bit more powerful than he expected. However, the cycling kept him focused, so he missed out on any sensory change. As he stood looking at the Ohio River, it was almost as though the dose pressed pause and waited for him to gather himself. He looked around for the others, and then it began to click. Each of them were throwing their bikes in the river and diving in fully clothed. With each splash, he began to return to a place of cerebral calm. None of this group were ever there. He had been fighting the schizophrenia so hard that it began to manifest profound delusions. So profound he couldn't dispute them until they became absurd. The absurdity was his touchstone. All these years and not until now could he see he could drive these profound moments to absurdity and it would show him the lie. He reached into his bag and pulled out the rest of the letters Avery gave him. The mystery was compelling. Were these letters going to motivate him to pedal faster? Would they infiltrate his brain for days wondering what any of what she wrote meant? He didn't want to take any chances. Now was the perfect opportunity to create a vacuum he could just fill with his own hope. He tossed each of them in the river with these delusions of cycling mates. He watched the ink blur and then they slowly fell into the depths of ice-cold water. I'm sorry, Avery. Costello then watched as the last one of these imaginary mates dove into the river. That's when he hopped on his bike and casually pedaled by the river and observed its power. He rode across and felt the current beneath him. It was one of the most grounding moments he'd experienced yet. He continued this hoping to wind down, but he couldn't seem to find the bottom of the tank. He planned on lunch in Paducah, Kentucky tomorrow where the Ohio River crosses the Tennessee River. Instead, he said goodbye to all the soldiers he left in the Mississippi and decided to pedal the extra 3 hours to his next checkpoint and save another day. When he got to Paducah, he found a gorgeous spot to eat near the river and FaceTimed Avery. He couldn't wait to tell her about the breakthrough he had after increasing his dosage. She immediately reminded him how thankful she was for being ignored for several days once again. He wrote it off as another much-needed psychological breakthrough. She broke the bad news to him about ingesting a full gram, and he shook it off like a relief pitcher giving up a leadoff home run in the ninth with a 2-run lead. He didn't know he would have to break from the psilocybin for a few days since he'd most likely boosted his tolerance. The experience in Cairo may have been worth it, so he cocked his shoulders up and gave a shameless, "Welp." Avery spoke in a whisper. Costello asked if she was doing okay. She hesitated and then came out and told him she learned something from Candace. She prefaced herself by explaining her suggestion to use the plant medicine was solely based on her experiences with people suffering with mental illnesses. Costello grunted in agreement like a caveman. Then she told him what his mom told her. A few nights back when they were visiting and drinking wine, Candace talked about Costello's youth. She talked about Costello speaking to people who he acknowledged were not there. Aaron, she told me you began to trust these voices because they were right more than they were wrong, Avery said. They were rarely wrong, Costello replied. Is there something we need to know about? Avery pled. A very long time ago, I started forgetting times when I suppose my mind felt I was doing something wrong. Who knows? Maybe it was my heart. All I've known is I had this uncanny way of erasing memories and then conjuring up imaginary friends who would put the pieces back together for me. Sometimes it was helpful and others it wasn't. I just knew I didn't have a say in the matter. Costello told Avery. Is there something you were told that you're keeping from us? Avery asked. Costello went on to explain to Avery that even though these recaps were right most of the time, it took quite some time to put all the pieces together and truly feel like the part of his life they were detailing for him were accurate enough to accept. Without saying the words, he gave her the impression he was in the midst of working through something he needs to confirm with granular detail and accuracy. Tell my mom I want to come play the piano soon. I'm sure she told you about our piano. So many things have passed through my life that I could live without. The piano gave me Claire. We promised to take care of each other forever. There isn't a day that goes by I don't worry for her, Costello said, tapering off. Aaron, Avery said with a tone of assurance. Avery, Costello chirped back. Please focus on getting to Maine as soon as possible. Your mom and I are planning to fly to come and bring you home, she expressed with a sense of hesitation. Avery didn't elaborate, but she and Candace intended on meeting Costello in Maine and visiting New Hampshire to see where he grew up. She didn't want to spook him. She just ensured he knew they were excited for him coming home soon after completing his dream. She told him to put the Appalachian mystery aside and just get through West Virginia in one piece as fast as he could, so he'd have the energy to focus on taking in all of New Hampshire. Candace told her about his dream as a teen to cycle his home state. She decided to see that he wasn't putting any of her desires ahead of his own. Costello was by far the kindest person Avery ever met, and she now knew he would do just that. Fooling him into catering to himself was going to be as easy as backing away just long enough to see that he does it. Then they can start over and find out what life has in store for them once he finds his own legend.